And if we're going to change people's opinions, we can't get mad at them. We can't shut them out. We can't just call them ignorant. Those things may be true, but you need to help them understand what our thinking is and what our world is like from their perspective, and sort of in baby steps.
Welcome to episode 56 of the Hunt Backcountry podcast, presented to you as always by Exo Mountain Gear. Tonight's guest is Wes Siler. He's a writer, but he doesn't write in hunting magazines. He writes in places like GQ and Wired and Outside Magazine. And he doesn't live in the backcountry either. He lives in Hollywood. So, at this point, you're probably wondering, what the heck is Wes doing on this show? Well, Wes is a hunter, and he enjoys backcountry hunting, and he's actually a great advocate for conservation and for hunting amongst a very anti-hunting crowd. Wes is doing great things, reaching people that most you and I would never reach, might never talk to. And we hear some great principles from Wes about why it's difficult to get his friends involved in hunting, how he's been a positive influence for conservation, and much more. We also hear about some of his trips and adventures and lessons that he's learned, like picking up a bow just 6 months before his first archery hunt. So this is a different, entertaining, yet informational, and hopefully somewhat inspirational episode. Hope you enjoy this one with Wes Siler. Let's get right to it. Well, Wes, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you, man?
I'm good, thanks. Just sitting here in Hollywood, California, with my dog and a beer.
Yeah, perfect night, man. I'm sure that most of our audience is probably sitting in Hollywood right now, so that works out great.
I'd imagine that the audience for a hunting podcast is 99% Hollywood based.
They're probably outside your door. So speaking of that, it's funny if you get on a line and start reading your information or like reading interviews with you. There's some interesting info. One line that I love that you actually wrote an article. It says, "I'm not the kind of person you would likely think of when you try and picture a hunter. I live in Hollywood, California, and a hot pink craftsman. I go to trendy bars and eat at fancy restaurants and blog for a living. My first real career job was at a fashion magazine in London." So yeah, I would think on that quote, from what you're describing, it's an interesting mixture. So we will certainly get to how you got involved in hunting, but first, just would love to hear a bit about your background. It's pretty interesting. You've been called a professional wild man that pretty much tested motorcycles and drove cars and stuff for a living. You've written for, like Wired and GQ and Rolling Stone. So kind of give us the story for the listeners who are unfamiliar just with you personally and professionally before we dive into hunting. Yes,
I'm a professional writer. I started, like you just said, at a fashion magazine in London. I was like the world's dorkiest little kid. I had like a bowl haircut and like acne and wore like very unfortunate clothes. And this art professor that I was in love with at university was like, "Hey, you got your internship." And I was like, "Okay, I'll do whatever you tell me, pretty lady." And it was at a fashion magazine. I walked in the first day and I was like, "Oh my God, there's models here."
This is great. Best internship ever.
Yeah, exactly. So I realized, as I looked at the guys around me and I was like, these guys like go out with models and stuff. If I got my act together and like didn't dress so bad and got my hair cut and wasn't such a jerk off, maybe I could one day date a model too. So I did that for a while, and then my original passion was cars. Grew up restoring cars with my dad. So my childhood goal with my career was always to be a road test editor at a car magazine. I did that. Found it kind of empty, moved on to motorcycles for a while, started a website that eventually became the largest website in the motorcycle space, and sold that a few years ago.
Yeah, that's actually how I found you. I used to follow you there.
On Helpful Leather?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. What do you ride?
So I've ridden kind of a bunch of different things. My parents, always rode. Like, so when I was growing up, I was on a mini bike as early as I can remember and stuff like that. And I got my motorcycle license like right when I was 16 and got my first bike, and actually used to ride with my parents a bunch. So
awesome.
I've had several bikes over the years, on road and off road, and pretty much anything on two wheels is fun.
Yeah, I love it. I love pretty much everything. I've got a KTM 990 Adventure right now that I'm sort of fixing up a little bit. And then I drive you've seen pictures of my giant lifted Land Rover that I cruise around Hollywood in.
Yeah.
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 Making plans right now. We're going to Baja for Thanksgiving. Some friends of mine and I.
Oh,
So
sweet.
that's our next trip in that. But yeah, I did I did the motorcycle world for a while. It was a lot of fun. I hurt myself a bunch of times, and just the world itself was very small, and I found it very frustrating. So I just gotten rid of that company, and I was out in Joshua Tree with my dog, just camping, and we were just hiking around, and he came over some boulders, and he found this really group of weird people, this group of really weird people, and we started hitting it off, and they liked my dog, and blah blah blah. And, 15 minutes into the conversation, they went away and had a meeting about me. And they came back and were like, "Hey, we had a meeting about you." And I was like, "I know, you guys are so weird." They're like, what's going on here is this is a Native American worship group. And, we think you're cool. We want to invite you to join our ceremony tonight. So long story short, I went an 8-hour ayahuasca fueled spirit quest in sort of a very impromptu fashion. And woke up in the morning, called my business partner, told him to go fuck himself, and decided to become an outdoors journalist.
Wow. So you kind of sort of literally stumbled into it.
Totally. So from that, I launched a website called Definitely Wild, which was initially part of the Gawker media group, a whole bunch of city-based blogs that talk a bunch of shit about gadgets and celebrity gossip and a bunch of stuff that I don't necessarily read.
Yeah.
But it was a big company. We recruited a lot of readers, and last year, Outside Magazine decided that we should be a part of that. So they, maybe an offer I couldn't refuse. Now I'm a part of Outside.
Yeah, which is a super cool publication.
It's great. It's sort of our biggest mainstream magazine talking about outdoors pursuits to, again, people who live in cities and have the money to sort of pursue them quite well.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a magazine that would reach people that would probably be traditionally described as liberals. Yep. And so covering hunting in it is always an interesting challenge. Not just from, my contract with Outside basically says I can do whatever I want. So they can't really say no to me, but, just trying to make the kind of stuff that the readers won't reject and can understand and find approachable. That's sort of the big challenge.
Yeah. And I think there's a balance there, and we'll definitely get to that. So first of all, before we get to you writing about the hunting and Outside and other places, how did you yourself get into hunting, like make that transition?
I was always really into the outdoors. I have a great father who, really gave me that gift as a kid. We go on huge trips every year and all the time. We're just spending, tons of time in the woods. He's not really a hunter, but I was always sort of around people that were through that and Boy Scouts and, whatever else, ROTC and things like that. So, I was always fascinated by it and I always wanted to do it because it just seemed like the logical conclusion of being fascinated by animals and wanting to spend time around animals and things like that. And, I was a big fisherman and it just seemed like a logical next step. Mm-hmm. So the first time I went hunting was probably in college. And, I got a whitetail back east in Virginia with a friend. And then, that was really neat. It was a really cool little, just introduction to, standard Eastern hunting. And, hunting was definitely always one of those things that I always wanted to get more into. And, when you live in Hollywood and, going into the woods is a couple hour drive and your friends don't maybe hunt, the barrier to entry for hunting is very high.
Yeah.
So, it was not really until I was out here in California and was offered some opportunities to tag along with by the time I sort of met people that were able to facilitate me tagging along, to go out and get a pig. And, from there I was like, oh man, I can do this. Like, this is something like I'm at a point in my life where this is financially accessible to me. I'm prepared to put in the drive or the travel time to get places that have animals. And, this is a really cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've written about the fact that hunting is a difficult sport to get into, especially when you're, kind of outside the bubble, if you will. Besides the access and the knowing someone who hunts, like what are the other barriers that you see? Is it those things you mentioned in sort of like time and money? Or are there other things that you, like from a knowledge perspective, that outsiders find hunting intimidating?
If you think of your sort of prototypical American hunter, it's somebody who lives close to the land and probably gets food as a very cheap alternative to shopping at the store, right? So a deer costs them, a 30-cent bullet, and, maybe the tree stand they buy once every 5 years is some camo. And they go out on a friend or, on a friend's land or a buddy's land or their own land and just get a deer. And, imagine what that looks like for somebody who lives in a city, pays $2,000 a month in rent or whatever people pay these days, can barely afford their car payment, much less, the fee to go to a gun range outside the city, which requires traffic, sitting in, travel and sitting in traffic, and a hunter education course and an expensive rifle. You think about the financial lives of your average city-based young person, and there's not a lot extra there. Mm-hmm. And if there is, it's probably spent on girls and beer and nice clothes. And,
yeah.
You know what I mean? So just getting the introduction, the point where you can shoot competently, or how to you spend enough time in the woods that you know how to find a deer, or that you spend enough time in the woods that you're even exposed to any sort of pro hunting message. It's just so alien. There's just not that crossover. So even if I have a lot of friends here in Hollywood who are very fascinated by the idea of coming hunting, but even just the investment of time and coming to the gun range with me and practicing with their shotguns, so they can go bird hunting, or picking up $1,000 weather bee Leupold scope package, so they can go get a larger animal, is just so far outside of anything that seems practical to them that it's a very difficult commitment to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. I could see with, the food movement and things like that, where that younger, more urban crowd has more of an interest in hunting. But, I mean,
totally.
There's definitely a barrier to entry when you didn't grow up with it. It's not like, Grandpa went out and taught you necessarily when you were 8 and handed you down his 30-30 lever action. That's my story. And if I didn't have that, and was starting from scratch, like you said, it's the time, it's the money. That's a huge barrier.
And who do you go with? Right. So you're some guy who lives, let's say you live in Brooklyn, and you really like the idea. You've been exposed to the message of healthy, humane, ethical, wild caught meat. Man, that's cool. That's for me. Who do you go with? Who do you say, hey, you want to invest a couple $1,000s and several weeks of our time in going around in the woods in camo and looking like a bunch of rednecks? Mm-hmm. It's such a difficult.
Oh, and by the way, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're probably are going to come home empty-handed, and your girlfriend's going to be mad at you.
Yeah. So, are there any programs or any movements that you've seen that are enabling that to happen, or it's really just kind of more of a one-on-one? You kind of have to.
Got to be a one-on-one thing. Yeah. I look around my peer group, and there's a lot of us at sort of the same level, where maybe we had a little exposure to hunting growing up. Maybe we want to do it now. Maybe we just want to do it better. And it's all of us sort of trying to talk to each other, hey, okay, this weekend we've been planning this. This is our deer hunting weekend. We've got the tags. We're staying at a friend's cabin. We've worked on this together, and we're encouraging each other. And that's really where it sort of come from for me, is having that kind of thing. And then making, I'm very fortunate in that, I travel around the world and do awesome shit with rad people. And, some of those people are able to sort of help me out. Mm-hmm. And, meeting guys who are Army Rangers hung up in Washington, who are dude, you got to come with us. And then put up with me being an ignorant jerk the entire time. Yeah. They're oh, you're holding your gun upside down. What mistake is made, and they can be patient about that and put up with me tagging along. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not many people have those ingredients.
Right. Yeah. That's a good lesson for us, though. Just a reminder of that, the personal reaching out and taking some of our own hunting time, which is hard for most of us to find. But if we can, say, take 10% of it and focus that on trying to get somebody new involved and being that patient sort of mentor, it would certainly help.
Even if it's just being patient, answering questions, because there's, it's one of those worlds where there's not a lot of guidance out there for all the really, sort of obvious questions for beginners.
Yeah.
Where do I go? How do I set up a tree stand? How do I stalk? Do I need to buy this camo? Is that necessary? Scent control. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
It's just, there's not a whole lot of guidance out there. And a lot of the publications and a lot of the media in the space, speaks to guys that have been doing their whole life. They're like, yeah, you got to get a deer. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah. if existing hunters can do one good thing for hunting, it's if they even in their entire career as a hunter just help one person get into it, it's the best thing any of us can do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's a balance that is difficult to strike even with this show, because we try and dive like super deep into the guys who are most into it and most dedicated to it and who already are experienced, and then try and take that further, because like that's what we're doing is we're hunters that we're trying to learn from our guests. And so a lot of times we get into these deep topics. At the same time, we are cognizant of, man, like a lot of what we're covering, if you don't have context or familiarity or some base knowledge, it's like probably way over your head.
Exactly.
And so even in this moment, like you guys listening to this, if you were new to concepts or you have like stupid questions, I would love to do, an episode on like beginner stuff. So just for you guys who are listening, to interrupt the show, if we can go ahead and email us to podcast@exomountaingear.com, and we would love to do, shows and topics that are all about those beginner things. I think that would be really cool. So yeah, you mentioned, this younger demographic, and obviously the context that you're in, where you live in Hollywood and the mainstream areas that you've written. And it's kind of interesting that the more public you have gone in recent years with your hunting in terms of writing about that has been in the midst of some controversies, such as the whole Cecil the Lion chaos.
Oh God, yeah.
Which you kind of like got thrown in the middle of, right? So just talk a bit about like maybe some of what you've gone up against. And I don't say that like in a way that you're against them, like, and that you vilify them, because I think you do a very good work about, although they might be very against what you for, like you stand a very solid, reasonable ground. But just kind of talk about those interactions of being in the mainstream media and writing for these publications and being the hunting guy who probably takes a beating.
Oh yeah. I mean, you have to understand that, like, it's funny to talk, especially in this election cycle right now, people talk about the liberal media. Most of the media is made in cities by people who wear suits and go to fancy restaurants and drive Toyota Priuses and that kind of thing. They're not from Missouri. They're not from Arkansas. They're not from Washington State. And a lot of the time, for one of the shows that I went on to talk about Cecil was Dr. Drew. Their audience is normal people as well, not people who are exposed to nature. And it's very beneficial for media a lot of the times to draw moral judgments, because it helps get people riled up. It helps engender
hype cycle.
It hype cycle. It helps engender people being engaged in spending time on your site and blah blah blah. And you're just feeding a beast of ignorance, really, in the pursuit of just sort of having this mass agreement or this mass hype about something stupid. And being one of those people and being, in some small position of respect in that world and coming in with an alternative view is honestly actually an opportunity, because I'm, one of the few people in LA who, is known to these show producers and can go on the shows and, speak intelligently about the subject. And there's just not a lot of people like that. I can go on the show and be a peer. I'm not, a Duck Dynasty dude.
Right.
And so that it's actually helped a lot being able to do that and hopefully get a pro hunting message, or help people just maybe think critically about these things that they're just so knee jerk about.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that like some of what you've written about and like those appearances on shows, it's like you're a voice of reason among what a lot of times is just emotional outrage, I would say.
Yeah, just caterwauling about, a bunch of I'm upset because I think lions are cute and one was killed.
Right.
And that's like the extent of thought that people put into this. And like we as hunters, we have to understand that normal people are normal. We're the exception. We've gone out and become more enlightened about animal conservation. And if we're going to change people's opinions, we can't get mad at them. We can't shut them out. We can't just call them ignorant. Those things may be true, but you need to help them understand what our thinking is and what our world is like from their perspective, and sort of in baby steps.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I think is helpful is you try and make a very informed case about the good of hunting and of conservation. It's something that, I see somebody like you do that, and we have, other folks who are great advocates for hunters in that way, guys like Stephen Ranella, for sure, who make that great case. But what are some of those, like, if you are, dealing with a non-hunting audience or even one-on-one, kind of give us the breakdown on how you approach the value in the good of hunting and the arguments that you would make for hunting and it being a positive thing. You don't need to, go into a big spiel, but like what's a good approach to share with those folks?
I have this conversation like every damn day. So it's like, like even today I was just having this conversation on Facebook. A friend in Spain posted a picture of a deer he just got on my Facebook wall, was like, hey, come over next year with me and we can hunt on my farm. And then, another friend sees that and she's like, that's terrible. I don't understand how you ever do that. And, how do you do that to animals, blah, blah, blah. The conversation always starts with, you guys have to understand what conservation is. It is managed use. And without value, nature doesn't have a reason to exist in our very cold reality of a human populated world. And so by applying a value to these animals, we are motivated to conserve them. And then the actual, moving parts of conservation with, the carrying capacity and, how tags are determined and issued by zones, to, bring animals back to that carrying capacity is sort of the next step in that argument. You sort of lose them about there because their eyes glaze over because the conversation's taken more than 10 seconds and, isn't a BuzzFeed listicle, but one of the points you can always hit on is, in large part is not actually due to us because, gun sales are booming right now for political reasons. But the result of that's good for us hunters is that the Pittman-Robertson tax that's applied to firearms and bullets and such is at record levels. So last year, Pittman-Robertson raised $1.1 billion for animal conservation in America. And that's a huge sum of money that is not spent on like the $1 million, CEO of $1 million salary of a CEO or on advertising or anything like that. It just goes directly to animal conservation. It's what pays for fish and game. It's what pays for anti-poaching efforts. What pays for habitat rehabilitation. And you compare that $1.1 billion sum to the budgets of some of the world's largest wildlife conservation charities. Like the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, is the biggest animal conservation charity in the world, and its annual budget is, off the top of my head, something like $228 million a year. That's spent worldwide, and a lot of that's spent on like carbon abatement and advertising and paying staff and things of that nature. And $28 million worldwide pales in comparison to $1.1 billion spent right here in America. And so I always try to explain to people hunting is why we have big animals in America. It's why we have the deer. It's why we have the antelope. It's why we have the cougar. It's why we have the bear. It's why we have the elk. And if you're able to just say something quick like that's a soundbite, they might not believe you at the time, but the next time they're sort of exposed to a hunting message, they might remember you saying that and maybe hopefully think a little more critically about where they're going with their outrage.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Something,
that you've written about, which, hunters will certainly get, but I'm curious about how this has been received by non-hunters is, you basically state the fact that you don't hunt because you hate animals or nature, but because you love them. And our audience hearing that's probably like, yeah, totally. But to others, that's probably such an insane statement. Like,
yeah, you were in the woods and you killed Bambi's mom. How dare you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is the response to something like that?
It's difficult, especially here, like in the city. I'm single. I'm always trying to date girls, and I've got an antelope trophy above my bed.
Yeah.
There's got to be a little explanation before they see that, right?
There's kind of like a taxidermy thing going on with hipsters, though, right? I mean, there's a little bit
there totally is, but it's one thing to buy something at a vintage store, like, right. Oh, I got a steerhead, and it's one other thing to be like, I shot that in the heart,
right? Yeah, yeah.
So there's got to be a little bit of explanation. People honestly have been very open to it once all this level of explanation come around.
Yeah.
I have a wonderful dog that goes everywhere with me and is sort of very well known and much more popular and more well respected than I am. And so people sort of think, here in Hollywood, people think of me as the animal guy.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that babysits their dogs. I'm the guy that has the best dog in town. I'm the guy that'll come rescue an animal or, do that kind of thing. And so when they hear that I hunt, they often are like, wow, really? We thought you loved animals. And it's like, well, I do. This is part of it, and this is why. And then hopefully, all this bigger message that we're discussing on the show can sort of inform a conversation. And, you being a positive role model in general is maybe some of the best way to help people be like, oh, wow, I thought hunters were horrible people, but you're a nice guy. What's the disconnect here?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think just hearing all this, the big takeaway is, for me, it's common sense. Like, be nice. Don't be a jerk.
Totally.
Be willing to have a conversation, not just to, yell bullet points at somebody.
Yeah, don't just call somebody names. Don't call them ignorant. Don't be like, hey, you're a liberal and I'm conservative, and we have no common ground. It's like, well, we're probably actually 99% agreed on everything.
Yeah.
Why don't we find that common ground rather than talk about our differences?
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, it's just kind of like we were talking about before the recording, the political environment, the whole idea that as Americans we can disagree and discuss it without just labeling each other and going crazy. It's like we all rail against that fact that we're so divided, but I see very few people who are sitting down going, yeah, we are divided, so let's work through it. Let's talk about it. Let's not be the person who's just slamming the other side, we need to have that approach, I think, is if we're going to be good ambassadors, if you will, of hunting.
Exactly. Instead of jumping to conclusions about somebody or, being mean to them, just be nice and try to understand where they're coming from, and see them as somebody who's not an enemy, but a potential convert and a potential future hunter.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this for me, this always the rubber really hits the road, because many of our listeners probably aren't going to be in Hollywood tomorrow and not have to deal with this, but most of our listeners, when they go to hit the backcountry, they're going to run into people at the trailhead who are hikers or bird watchers or something who might very well be non-hunters, who might very well be anti-hunting. So each of us, even if we're not in Hollywood, we all have those opportunities, if you will, where we run into the non-hunting public and have a chance to, be a good voice for hunting.
Oh, totally. And I'm sure, everybody listening to this show has probably had the same experience as have you, but, you're walking out of the woods or walking, you cross a trail, and there you are, the guy in camo with a gun or a bow, and there's a family or some girls on a hike or something like that. And they give you nasty looks. And instead of trying to be scary or intimidating or blow them off or whatever it is, smile and say hello and, just be like, hey, how are you guys doing? You need anything? And try to be a good ambassador. I think it's all of our responsibility to try to be a good ambassador for our sport.
Yeah. So I would love to dive into some of the stories that you've written about Wes and the black bear hunt, which we talked about. You went back for redemption for just this past fall, but let's talk about that initial black bear hunt. You kind of mentioned that, you were worried about going on that and writing about it just because the effect of what that might be.
Yeah, but, I mean that was just after Cecil.
Yeah.
So it was literally the whole world was just oh my God, hunting is awful, you know. And you're oh, here I am. I've just taught myself a new sport, in that case archery. I've invested $5,000 in this, and by the time I'm done with all the bow and the accessories and range time and arrows and blah blah blah, and I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna get fired from my damn job. For pictures of a dead bear and the ensuing social media outrage. Yeah,
and there's something about bears too that I think the non-hunting public sees bears differently in many cases than your average whitetail.
Exactly. So
they're more sensitive to it.
Yeah, with a whitetail you can definitely more easily get the food argument across.
Yeah.
I was very carefully hunting a bear that ate berries and roots and stuff like that to have a good tasting bear. And I was, going to eat it and use it all, and make a rug and make a little necklace for my 5-year-old nephew or one of the claws. It's all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And, really use the animal and try to get the best possible death, etc. But, people they just see those big eyes in the Disney cartoon and, bears are cute and don't kill them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was something I had a lot of conversations about with a lot of people in my life, and it was definitely very controversial. I got a good shot on the bear thanks to my friends scouting on my behalf. and I missed it. Which probably actually worked out for the best in that case. It was still, a great week of hunting with a new buddy, and now we're really good friends, and it's still time in the woods, and time running around with bows and arrows, and nothing wrong with a hunt. You don't bring something home.
Absolutely.
But it was definitely a very emotionally charged, time to be out there bear hunting for a week just after Cecil.
Yeah, but I mean, you've written about, I think even in that article, that, to most people, nature is something that's just observed, but to you, you want to be a part of nature. I think that's something that we as hunters can all relate on is, we're out there, experiencing the world as a bear does, or, trying to be smarter than one or trying to be sneakier than one. And we all know how difficult that is. People might laugh at us, but outside of our urban environment, we're not top dog. Yeah.
And that's a huge part of hunting to me is I remember after, I thought that I'd shot the bear, and there was a big blood trail, and I basically just put an arrow, one blade of the broadhead through its brisket was what our end conclusion was. So there was a blood trail and went into this giant blackberry thicket. And me and my buddy Griff, who's a retired Army Ranger, spent 8 hours of our lives on hands and knees crawling through bear tunnels in this blackberry thicket, just getting cut to shreds, shredding our clothing. I found the bear's den and crawled down inside with my knife in my mouth, like an thinking it was gonna be dead.
So well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I put my hand through an underground bee's nest and got stung 100 times. And, it's just, you're really out there doing something in the woods with a purpose and, with a positive purpose, and really interacting with nature on its terms. And that's really especially in this age of everybody working on computers and sitting inside all the time, a really great fundamental challenge to, where we come from as humans.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, what are your perspectives on trophy hunting? And obviously that means different things to different people, but when you hear that, what are your thoughts?
It's one of those that, every conversation that I have with a non-hunter where they want to, rant and rail about trophy hunting and how evil it is, you sort of have to agree with them, just at least on a surface level to start, develop that connection and that level of agreement. And then you sort of back them into that, it doesn't really matter what a hunter's motivations are, what they're going out to get, because the system of hunting is so universally positive and so good for the animals, whether that be here in Africa, that, even if you're just going over there to hunt a lion, you're basically funding lion conservation to the tune of $50,000 plus.
Yeah, it's a decent contribution.
That's not a bad thing. It's probably more than they donated to lion conservation last year.
Yeah, right.
So you can you want to disagree publicly with trophy hunting to a certain degree, just because it does suffer that bad image, and then you use that sort of disagreement to back people into, hey, maybe this isn't so bad.
Yeah.
I'm largely not a trophy hunter, primarily because I'm not a rich dude, and taxidermy is expensive, and going after some of these really big, great looking animals is expensive. I just want to go out and fill my freezer with meat.
Yeah.
That's really my goal. I've got a couple trophies these days. I've got a European mount, blacktail in the front of my front porch. To scare all my friends that come over. I've got an antelope hanging over my bed, and I've got a few other things. And, I really take pride in it. It's a memory for me. It's a connection to that world for me. And it's, here in Hollywood, it's also a big middle finger to people that might break into my house or cause trouble in my parties or something like that. Hey, this guy's armed, knows how to use it. Right. Yeah. The local police love me. I came home with an animal last year. I think it was probably the blacktail, and I gave them all little gift bags with a couple pounds of venison sausage in it.
Nice.
And they're like, "How'd you get this?" And I was like, "With a bow and arrow." And they're like, "Oh man."
That's funny.
Yeah.
So I'd love to dive into that archery topic and bow and arrow, because that's something, speaking of barrier to entry and something that can be intimidating. What was your experience? Because I know that, you primarily hunted with a shotgun and a rifle, and then, as you even mentioned, prepared really for that bear hunt and dove into archery. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I met this guy Griff, and Griff and I become very good friends. He's a retired Army Ranger guy, very well respected in that world. And I wrote a story about him and his company, Combat Flip Flops. It was very popular. We sold out his entire inventory for the year, put 61 girls in school in Afghanistan as a result. And he wanted to do me a favor in return, so he invited me on an archery bear hunt in Washington. And I had 6 months to get ready for it. I'd never shot a compound bow before. I last shot archery in Boy Scouts on some bullshit, fiberglass, piece of junk. So I went to Oak Tree Gun Club, which is a fantastic local gun. We probably, you wouldn't think it, but Los Angeles probably has one of the best gun clubs in the world. And Oak Tree is just a fantastic place. And sought out the archery pro there, and I was like, hey, you're going to teach me archery in the next 6 months so I can go on a bear hunt with Special Forces dudes. And he was like, you're on crack.
Yeah, 6 months is not very long.
It's not very long. So I shot every bow in the shop, and I ended up with a PSE full throttle, which seems like a crazy bow for a beginner to start on, but it's what I shot best on that day.
That is pretty nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a physically fit dude, and I do a lot of sports, so this is what felt best. It felt like, it shot so fast, it felt like one of my Weatherby's, where it's a nice, flat shooting arc. So I picked that up and put all the accessories on it, best money you could buy. And I spent 5 days a week for 6 months practicing for an hour or more.
Wow.
And I missed my shot on the ultimate hunt. That's sort of, the realistic nature of hunting. But I'm a pretty damn good shot now. And I, was better after that 6 months of practice than I am now. But
so did you shoot with that archery pro through that period, or was it you just kind of going self-taught and figuring it out? What was that like?
Yeah, no, Carlos, I mean, he didn't give me, it's archery. There's not a whole lot of formal lessons you can take. He sort of set me on the right path, and then would, check in on me occasionally and tell me I was doing it wrong or make fun of me, or, tell me a completely unrelated story that wasted my time on the range, or, whatever.
Right.
But yeah, he was a huge help. And, I would say it was 90% self-taught and 10% lessons, or whatever the instruction took the place of, which was mostly sarcasm, but
mostly making fun of you as you try to figure it out. Exactly. That's what friends are for.
Exactly. So it was fun. I did a little 3D shooting before I get into that. I'm trying to do more 3D shooting now, but again, just the whole barrier to entry of trying to get my car and go someplace on a Sunday morning through traffic for 2 hours to go shoot some bows and arrows is, a little more of a challenge than maybe I wish it was. But yeah, it's a sport that I really enjoy now, that I've helped other friends get into. It's not that difficult to learn. It's definitely a difficult sport. It's not shooting a rifle, where you sort of line things up, and, as long as you're not going out to, long ranges, it's not that difficult. It takes strength, and it takes coordination, and, it takes some sort of understandings of physics and how those apply to the real world as things are sort of going really fast. But I like that challenge. I really enjoyed having that in my life for as a new thing for 6 months there. It was really fun to go out and be like, oh, I suck at this. I need to be good enough to do this with Special Forces dudes. Okay.
Yeah, you just got to commit to it and make it happen.
Yeah, you just got to do it. And I don't think it's beyond anybody's ability to figure out. I certainly thought that I wasn't going to be good enough, and I did. I'm pretty good now. Yeah. So people listening, if you wanted to check out archery, you just got to go shoot.
Yeah.
No, it's not impossible.
Yeah, and once you start, you'll probably be hooked and doing it 5 days a week, just like you did.
Exactly, and if my dumb ass can figure it out, anybody can.
Well, if that's not an endorsement, I don't know what is.
I've got this really funny arm injury on my left arm from one of the many motorcycle accidents, or crashes, I should say. So my whole left arm is like a giant bow shape, and so it gives me that really good natural hold on the grip, where the whole arm just lock my left hand into the grip. My whole arm just arches out of the way of the string.
Oh, yeah. Got that natural curve.
Yeah, who knew that would ever come handy.
One of the positives of crashing bikes, right?
Yeah, the first step for archery for everybody out there listening should be to crash motorcycles several dozen times.
I was going to say, and which one of the accidents was this that actually did it?
I think it's just a compilation of various injuries and how they all came back together into some semi-working arm.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to wrap up with two things that may or may not be related, but One is what do you feel is like the most important thing that you're in the process of learning as a hunter? And two is what hunt are you most excited about? Either that you already know is happening and is coming up, or just something that you want to make happen.
Mm-hmm. I think, the big challenge for me right now, I live in California. There's a huge drought. I have a deer tag for locally and I have a bear tag for locally this year. And honestly, just going out in the woods and being able to find the animals is such a challenge here right now. This isn't Washington State. This isn't back east. You don't walk in the woods and see a deer.
Yeah.
You can go out there. I got a Pacific hybrid deer last year up by Ojai in a place that has like a 3 or 4% hunter success rate. And I talked to a guy on the first day of my shoot, and he'd been up there 4 days, not even seen a deer. And just being able to go out there and figure out where they are, and then all the skills of getting close to them and all the skills of going undetected are something I always throughout my entire life try to become better at. 'Cause that to me is most of the challenge of hunting.
Yeah,
is
sure.
finding the animals and being able to get close to them.
Mm-hmm.
And like any skill, like motorcycle riding or like anything like that, it doesn't matter how good you are, you can always get better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
And then, my upcoming hunts are deer here in D11, which is Angeles National Forest. So literally the mountains like right above LA, like the LA suburbs in mountains start, and that's where I'm hunting.
Yeah.
There's really good deer there. It's a popular hunting area, which is one of the challenges. The season's already started, ends on October 6th. I'm going to start. I haven't started hunting yet. I've just been traveling. So I'm going to go this weekend and then the last weekends and just sort of do spot and stalk, and just through like Google Earth and Topo Maps and then knowledge from previous hikes and stuff in that area, I have some good ideas on where I think I'll be able to find some success. That'll be rifle on my Weatherby Vanguard and 240 Weatherby Magnum. I think I'm going to use for that. And then I bought a bear tag. My friends at Weatherby gave me a tip on a little honey hole where I can't tell you where it is, but I think I have a pretty good chance of success there.
Awesome,
but with that one, it's going to be, whether I have time to go do it between now and the end of the year.
Yeah.
Because again, you just live in a city and it's a challenge to get out there.
Yeah.
I'm also going to get a pig. One of Outside's editors is this really cool girl, Axie. She's our gear editor, and she just got her first rifle this year, Weatherby Camilla, their new sort of lighter, shorter women's rifle. And so I'm going to take her on a pig hunt up by Paso Robles. And hopefully everything goes according to plan and we both fill our freezers because, that pig meat is good.
Yeah, that's very cool, man. Well, hey, I so appreciate you taking the time, and I think I said this even before we recorded, but I appreciate the voice of reason and the way that you represent hunting positively in such a unique way that most of us, you are for sure reaching an audience that our listeners won't reach. You're reaching an audience that many of our hunting people in the media won't even reach, because you just have a whole different a whole different audience through Outside and through the other places you've written. So I just think it's super cool of what you're doing. I want to thank you for it.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for everything that you guys do. Hopefully all together we can help really transform the image of hunting in this country, and continue to participate in a sport that's just so positive for the country, for the people that do it, and for the animals.
Yeah. So in addition to following you in Outside Magazine and obviously on their site as well, where can our listeners connect with you on social media or anywhere else?
Yeah, probably the best place is Instagram. It's just at Wes Siler. Okay. And then Twitter as well. I'm not super active on Twitter, but if you really want to follow me on there, I will talk back to you. It's at Indefinite Wild.
Awesome. Well, Wes, appreciate the time, man.
All right, thanks, dude. Speak to you soon.
Before we go, I want to give a big thanks to Greg Freeman for leaving us a review on iTunes. Greg, we want to send you some Exo Mountain Gear swag, so please email us your address to podcast@exomountaingear.com. And listeners, if you're enjoying the show and want to leave us a review on iTunes, you would also be entered into these giveaways. Speaking of Greg's review, he mentioned that he was looking for a future episode on hunting post-rut or late-season elk. Well, Greg, we happen to have recorded just that episode and released it on the previous podcast, exomountaingear.com/55. So episode 55 will take you right to it. And listeners, if you do have any other comments, questions, or feedback, as always, you can email us directly to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Until next time, guys, happy hunting if you're still chasing something. And if not, I'm sure like many of us, we're counting down till that next hunt.